And a hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode 184 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. We're back in the car for episode 184. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platform such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. So this will be the 14th, entry in our continuing series of guilty pleasure movies. And the film I'm going to be talking about tonight is another Gen X standard, although maybe not quite as well known as some of the other ones, like with Sylvester Stallone, for example. But the movie is The Last Dragon. As entertaining a film as I have ever seen. A rip from start to finish. Set in Harlem, and it's about a young man whose name is Leroy, but he is such a skilled practitioner of martial arts that they just add Bruce to almost like give him an unofficial first name of Bruce, so he's Bruce Leroy. The film was produced by Motown's Berry Gordy, like the Berry Gordy. For reference, Dreamgirls was pretty much based on Berry Gordy. That's who Jamie Foxx's character was supposed to be. He was playing Berry Gordy. The Last Dragon is set in an almost alternate reality where people who are proficient in martial arts just kind of run everything. Beat the crap out of people when they want to, injure people when they want to, and just pretty much run shit. I mean, I guess it could be like that, but the film is sort of a heightened reality, and it has a bit of an absurdist, almost surrealist quality. Like there's a scene in a movie theater where you're scratching your head and you're saying, well, what planet is this? This can't be happening. This can't be right. But ultimately, the story is about a young man on a quest, a classic hero's journey of somebody who is very talented and very skilled, and their heart is in the right place. But maybe they're closer to the end of their journey than they realize. And maybe the question, which the main character of Leroy Green, is consistently asking, who's the master? He's seeking the master. Presumably the master is how he's going to complete his training. And a lot of the movie follows his search for the master. And then you had another character played by a late great actor, Julius J. Carey III, who, his name is Sho'nuff. I assume that's his nickname. We don't get a different name, I don't think. And he dresses in an outlandish costume. I'm trying to figure out, in 1985 Harlem, you're going to walk around in this crazy costume, and everybody just accepts that, yeah, this is your crazy costume. You're the Shogun of Harlem, and nobody's going to mess with this guy because he's absolutely lethal. But ultimately, each guy thinks, or will think, will know, will believe that they are the master. And a movie builds to a climactic fight between Sho'nuff and Leroy Green. And even though Sho'nuff is a way bigger man, physically way bigger than Leroy's skill level is so absurd and stupendous. Maybe Leroy can take this guy, even though he looks like he's half the size. So there are a lot of really kind of colorful, interesting supporting players and supporting performances, including also someone who's passed, the late Denise Matthews, who went by the name Vanity. She was a very talented, she was a terrific singer, And it's not that she was a great actress, but she had a certain presence on screen. As they say, the camera loved her. And in this movie, she plays a character called Laura, who is, I guess she would have been like an MTV VJ. Nowadays, MTV, they don't play music videos. We've been joking for 30 years that MTV doesn't play music videos anymore. So anytime you hear somebody say that, when I was 18, we were saying, yeah, they don't really play music videos anymore. But she plays a VJ, a DJ who is a VJ, a disc jockey who is a video jockey. And there's a kind of a goofy subplot involving a mob boss who wants his girlfriend to be in a music video, and he needs the character of Laura to play the video. And it's just, that whole subplot doesn't really work. But for me, it does not take away from just how much fun this movie is, how super entertaining it is, and how colorful the characters are. So the actor who plays the lead was a very skilled martial artist in real life. His name is Taimak, Taimak. He's really good on Instagram. I follow him, and he does a lot of appearances. There's so many people love this movie, and he has a kind of innocence throughout the film, that his character, he may be wizardly when it comes to the martial arts, but in terms of being a kind of functioning person, his social graces are a little bit off. He is deferent, he is sort of deferential to a fault, constantly apologizing, doesn't know when to speak his piece or when not to. He's just, I think that he's probably on the autism spectrum, or that's how he's coming across. He's a bit neurodivergent. And his interactions with Laura, who clearly is sweet on him, she really wants more than to just be a casual friend. And then there's a like kind of a mini subplot where his younger brother, who is an absolute scream, he has designs on Laura, not particularly age appropriate. And I remember even as a 12-year-old boy watching this movie, when the brother is yelling at the crime boss's stooge who has his hands on Laura, he screams, "Get your hands off my woman." He's like a 12-year-old kid, and she's presumably in her mid-20s, and he's screaming, "Get your hands off my woman." So the film is not to be taken literally and not to be taken seriously. It exists solely to entertain, and does it brilliantly. And I remember reading, and I read this many times, Roger Ebert's review of the film. And Ebert gave it a kind of modified thumbs up. His print review was 2.5 stars. And Roger was a little tricky, because there are 2.5-star movies where he gave thumbs up, such as Jean-Claude Van Damme's Sudden Death, where it's 2.5 stars, but he gave it a thumbs up. He thought it was super entertaining, as dumb as it was. And then there are films like The Last Dragon, where I don't know, I think he gave it a thumbs up, but his interpretation was the subplot with the mob guy and his female, his girlfriend singer. He felt that subplot really dragged on the film and hurt the film immensely. So I'm not even sure if Roger gave it a thumbs up, but if you go on Rotten Tomatoes, the film scores in the 60s. And I would say that it should be even better than that. So the basic setup is, you have this Leroy Green, and he has been trained and trained and trained. And what he doesn't realize is that his, I guess, kind of sensei, who has been telling him, "You must find the master, you must find the master." What he doesn't realize is a master is him. The master is Leroy Green. And he doesn't realize that. He doesn't realize that until a moment towards the end of the film where he's on the receiving end from Sho'nuff. And Leroy's understanding, his sort of the final level for him, if it were in a video game, when he realizes, holy shit, I'm the master. It's actually me. It's a great fight sequence. The way that they choreograph it, because Julius J. Carey quite clearly knew what he was doing as far as martial arts. He's also was a skilled practitioner. He was not just some random guy. Because there are things that you can do nowadays with sort of, with special effects. And for example, the Matrix movies, Keanu, Lawrence Fishburne, Carrie-Anne Moss, Hugo Weaving, they all underwent rigorous training. But none of them they weren't black belts. This was not something that they normally did in civilian life. And the kind of, the wire work, or what they called wire fu, is what kind of put it over the line and said, wow, this is incredible. So in the world of this movie, it really looks like, because there was no such thing as wire fu back then, it really looks like Julius J. Carey and Taimak are having a knockdown, drag out. It could be a fight to the death. We don't really know if it's going to be a fight to the death, but that's Sho'nuff wants the kid's heart. He wants to basically end him and have so that nobody will ever question who is the man, who's the master. And so you have the film has a series of what I consider to be incredible moments. And one of them is a moment where Leroy comes to the realization or the feeling that I'm the master. It's me. The use of music, not surprisingly, because it is a Berry Gordy production, the use of music throughout the film is fantastic. And there has been a lot of talk recently and going back decades, and a lot of things that people talk about have been discussed. There's nothing like, oh, this is all new. No. The Last Dragon does not simply use popular songs on the soundtrack blasting at max volume or anything like that. The songs were very carefully chosen and calibrated to moments in the film. And a moment in this movie where Leroy is on the receiving end and suddenly comes to the realization that I've mentioned. On the soundtrack, you hear the lyric, "You are the last dragon." And, you know, this isn't really a goosebump kind of movie. This is just fun and silly and over the top. I keep saying over the top like the Stallone film, but it's fun and silly and absurd. But you come to care for the characters. And Taimak, who didn't really have much of an acting career, I don't believe, whereas Vanity, Denise Matthews, went on to co-star with Carl Weathers, and she's really good in the movie Action Jackson, which I love. That was another guilty pleasure movie, but it really wasn't a big enough hit to have a sequel. But he's such a likable actor. You feel, and you're taken on a journey with his character, because we don't know where the journey is going, and he doesn't know where the journey is going. So this isn't one of those stories where the character knows more than the audience, or the audience knows more than the character. We're looking for the master too. We think that, oh, it's some guy over here, or maybe it's a guy that works in a Chinese restaurant in Little Italy, or whatever. You just don't know. And the film really works. It really works on you. It almost kind of tugs at the heartstrings towards the end, and doesn't feel like that kind of movie either. And it makes it work. It makes it happen. So I remember a couple of years ago, I got such a kick out of this. Somebody put a meme together. Speaking of 80s, although this movie that I'm about to mention is not a guilty pleasure movie, it's just a great movie. But somebody put a meme together, and it's called All Valley Karate Championships 85. And the meme posits that Leroy Green is somehow in the Valley in, LA. And Leroy Green is going to take on Daniel LaRusso from The Karate Kid. And as somebody who is a huge fan of both movies, Leroy Green it wouldn't even be a fight. Now, Leroy Green against Mr. Miyagi, that might be an interesting battle, because we never actually saw Miyagi even get tested or challenged in a fight. I don't think did anybody land a punch on Mr. Miyagi in all the movies, including the next Karate Kid? I don't think anybody landed anything. They were barely able to hit his elbows and knees with shots. The fights were usually over so quick. They were like Steven Seagal fights, where Seagal, one shot and the fight was over. But there were people, I did a poll, and there were people that actually were saying, well, they didn't know The Last Dragon, oh, well, I think Daniel LaRusso. Dan, what the fuck are you talking about? Leroy's the master. Of course he would beat Daniel LaRusso, whether it's a point system or whether it's a fight to the death like Karate Kid Part 2. Live or die. Die. Wrong. Great moments in movies. Now, unfortunately, The Last Dragon, to my knowledge, is not free on streaming anywhere. So you do have to, you have to spend a couple of bucks on Amazon Prime. Hold on, just check that out. In order to see the movie. But it is a movie that's worth seeing. It's just an enormous amount of fun. Don't take it too seriously, that kind of thing. And I don't know anybody who has seen this movie that didn't at least laugh their ass off, if not say, wow. Because when you have a kind of built-in audience with a martial arts movie, as this film ended up being a significant box office hit, I almost forgot to mention that, it grossed well over 3 times its production cost. And a lot of people, it is one of those movies, it has to be considered a cult film, and it is a guilty pleasure because the plot is fucking stupid. It's a movie that has dumb elements, I would say. The thing with the mob boss and the girlfriend, they could have made the movie without that. But it is a guilty pleasure movie because it's supposed to be set in the real world, and huge events in this movie couldn't happen. The idea that the top martial artist, that they'll have a glow, that when they execute a move, like fire shoots from their fingers. I mean, come on, what are you, Electro? So there's just a lot of levels of unreality, but it doesn't matter because it all works and it's all fun. And spoiler alert, the bad guys don't win. None of the bad guys win, and the good guys have their day. And I remember the last time I saw it, it was a couple of years ago, because it's a film, I don't think that it's been free on Netflix to my knowledge, and I don't think it's been free on Prime, but I actually saw it maybe 4 or 5 years ago on an old DVD copy. That's the thing we talk about physical media, and Christopher Nolan making that, he wasn't even joking, but it sounded like a joke when he said, he was talking about the need for physical media. And the need for physical media because if you don't continue to produce DVDs and Blu-rays and companies like Criterion Collection, if you don't have these pressings, you are at the mercy of the evil streaming services, to use his quote. And it's not something that I would have thought of. So, for example, I think The Last Dragon is the last movie, literally, that I've watched on DVD. I got rid of all my DVDs. I wasn't thinking in terms of, we have to have physical media, but physical media is critical. It is important. In the same way, I'll never forget this. More than one professor, they didn't all speak the same, they spoke the same language, but they didn't explain things the same way. But New York University, every professor, if at all possible, or if even half possible, they wanted to show us the movie. They wanted to actually have reels and a projector. They did not want to simply, back in the day, they didn't want to show us a laser disc. They sure as fuck didn't want to show us a VHS copy. They wanted us to watch the film, literally. And so you had film cans, you had a projectionist, and that's how we watched every movie, with very few exceptions. DVD didn't exist yet, but the idea is, in this instance, it wasn't just physical media, it was the exact media that it was produced. So, for example, you have an original negative, 14 film cans, whatever amount of film, I don't know how many, it could be any amount. You have an original negative, and a studio then strikes up, let's say, 1,500 copies of that original negative. That's what I'm talking about. We almost always watched that. We watched a movie. We saw the reels, one after another, not just Laserdisc player, VHS. And that's the importance of, Nolan wasn't specifically talking about that, but it's the same concept, that even though there's not going to come a time where every streaming service decides to pull Oppenheimer or whatever, You see these movies bounce around from one service to another, but they're not going to disappear. But at the same time, physical media is important in much the same way that, for example, nowadays, writers never have to use a typewriter, and you never actually have to print out a copy of your work or even have someone else print out a copy of your work. You can do everything digitally. But I will say, and I can vouch for this, and I would agree with anybody who says this, there is something about, for example, you put in a couple of good hard months of work and you churn out a 111-page motion picture screenplay. And even though you can just email it, you could send it in 1/100th of a second across the entire world, anywhere. Even with that, there is something to be said for having a hard copy, or in this case, actual pages, holding it in your hand and thumping it against the desk. I know it sounds stupid, but I believe it, and I do it and have done it. There is not a screenplay that I have written that I did not print out at least one hard copy of for that purpose, because physical media is important. It's funny, I hadn't even thought of it until just now that The Last Dragon is, in all likelihood, the final film that I have ever watched on DVD. So weird. But the importance of it exists. And it's not about being old school or old fashioned. But as we saw in a completely different kind of movie from The Last Dragon, Leave the World Behind, physical media becomes it. There's nothing else. When you have a situation, just think of it this way. You have a situation where there's no power. Temporarily. Power comes back on, but the satellites are fucked. So you have power, you can turn a TV on, but there's not going to be any programming on TV because the satellites are down. So what do you have? If you have physical media, if you have an extensive DVD and Blu-ray collection, could be TV shows, like on the in Leave the World Behind, the character of the daughter is obsessed with the show Friends. Thanks to physical media. Even though the world may be coming to an end, we don't really know what's happening, but at least I'll be able to watch the last episode of Friends. Thank goodness. And the movie kind of plays and has fun with that. But I didn't imagine that any discussion about the movie The Last Dragon would have me pondering physical media. But here we are. Physical media, very important. So, as far as the movie, The Last Dragon, there's really not much more to say. It's just as simple as I've described it. You have one guy who thinks he's the master. You have another guy who might be the master and isn't sure. They meet multiple times in the film, but they are on a collision course, and the movie can't possibly end before they square off to finally settle who's the master, who is the last dragon. And it is a great fucking movie. You know, it's so dumb in spots, it's goofy and silly, but it's a home run. Highly recommended. Anyone who hasn't seen it, if you're interested in movies with fighting to see how you can really choreograph, or how great choreography for fight sequences 40 years ago, really, really good stuff. Kind of like with wrestling, when we talk about professional wrestlers who are good workers, or when they say that someone is a good technical wrestler, what that means to me is that they sell the moves and the audience can't really see. They can't really see behind the curtain. The moves look real. The pain looks real because the moves look real. Holy crap, that looks like it hurts. And we've seen plenty of matches, or at least I have with wrestling, where they're not even coming close to hitting each other. The guy hit air with a drop kick, and so jumped over the top rope, and we're supposed to believe he connected. He missed. It didn't even come close. So this movie has some of the finest fight choreography, certainly of the 80s, because there's no special effects. They did stuff with the camera, but the fights were done during production. And I just watched, and this, you could find this on social media. It was a very interesting, because there are movies such as Matrix, when they show fight choreography without the wire work, the fights aren't really very impressive. But when you have great athletes and people who are sort of committed to what they're doing, you can still make magic. And there's a clip going around the internet now. I forgot which movie it's from. It might be from Captain America Civil War, but it's basically just dailies of Chris Evans as Captain America and Sebastian Stan, who I was 3 feet away from at Bev's gym in 2019 and didn't even realize it was him. But he's the Winter Soldier, and the two of them are squaring off, and it's a fight scene. And yes, it's slower than what we saw in the movie, but it looks pretty fucking real. And there's no trickery. That's kind of the point. And that's why this clip has been making the rounds. We're saying, man, they're really selling it. This is great. Great job by these guys. Way to go, Chris. Way to go, Sebastian. They made it look real, even though they probably didn't have to. And in The Last Dragon, the punches and kicks look like they're landing. And the pain on the faces of the two combatants looks real, because the punches and kicks look real. We temporarily forget we're watching a movie. We're watching a silly pastiche of Bruce Lee movies like Enter the Dragon, Return of the Dragon, Rescued from an Eagle's Nest, any number of Bruce Lee classics. Game of Death was his last film. But The Last Dragon, super entertaining. The 14th entry in our ongoing series of guilty pleasure movies. This has been episode number 184 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for taking this trip home with me on this Sunday night here in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you check out this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 185 real soon. Till then, who's the master? I am.